Yeah, it was a target-rich environment. We had a lot of Sicario. At that time, guys were desperate to get out of Mexico. There's a lot of intercartel killings that were going on. I mean, it was just a bloodbath down there all the way around. So we were able to cultivate sources, and we were able to work with people who very high levels because they were desperate to save themselves. I had touched on the border before in Tucson, and so I was not unfamiliar with the dynamics, but Juarez at that time was about as border as you could get. And all the big cartel players were moving through there, killing each other there. And it was a really, really steep lesson in cartels and how they functioned really at their worst, best and worst, I guess.
I'm Steve Murphy, DEA Special Agent retired and now host of the Game of Crimes podcast. If you've seen the Netflix series Narcos, then you know my story. I now bring you stories of heroism and bravery from our law enforcement and military heroes, and occasionally from the criminals that they faced. Welcome to Game of Crimes. Hey, crew. Thanks, y'all, for coming back to part 2 of this week's episode of Game of Crimes with Murph on the Morning. Our guest this week is Todd Scott. It's got 3 first names there, so I may call him by any of those names, but we're trying to call him Todd if this old man can remember. But if you listen to yesterday's episode, we are at the point where he's a group supervisor in Tucson, Arizona. We talked about some of his activities there. And in DEA, if you take the management track, you have to go do a stint in headquarters. That can last anywhere from 18 months to a lifetime. You might only be there 3 years, but it seems like a lifetime, depending on the job you have. And so it's time for you to go to Washington, Todd. And welcome back, by the way, brother. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me back. I had done my tour out in Tucson, and as you indicated, it's kind of a mandatory pull. Your name kind of comes up on a list, and it's your time to go to headquarters. And then, the fight is kind of where you go and, where you land in headquarters. And there's something to be said for a lot of the sections. They all have something to offer. But I was fortunate to get pulled into our Office of Congressional and Public Affairs. And, I didn't know anything about either of that really, but it sounded interesting. I'd known some people who'd kind of come through there. And if I was going to have to spend some time at headquarters, I was fine going into the building, into the mothership downtown, and Congressional and Public Affairs put you up on the 12th floor. So you're right by the administrator and everyone. And I thought it would kind of give me an opportunity to do some neat stuff that I really hadn't had a chance to do. And so it's always bittersweet leaving the field and kind of putting on a suit and going into the building and losing the kind of autonomy and the freedom that you have being a street agent or a supervisor of a street group. But I think they do a good job, or have done a good job, of having it a nice time in your career when that's not a bad break. Right. I always say if you're a group supervisor the way you're supposed to, you're exhausted by the time they pull you into the building. And so I was glad to do a little something different. And it ended up being particularly fortunate because when they brought me in, they divided into 2 sections. You had the congressional affairs section and you had the kind of public affairs section. And they kind of flip a coin as to where you landed. And I ended up on the public affairs side. And one of the things they gave me was I was responsible for answering media inquiries, specifically as it related to entertainment projects involving DEA. So if there was a writer or a screenwriter or a TV show wanted to do something about DEA, they'd call. They have a bunch of questions about what it's like to be an agent and how we do our job and things like that. And contracts would sometimes have to be written up depending if DEA was involved, documentaries and things like that. And so that ended up on my desk. And so as a result, for a lot of my time up there, I was talking with people who were making stories, making movies, writing books about DEA. And it kind of reinvigorated the passion for writing that I had back in high school and college. And, I spent some time with some great novelists, some great screenwriters. Got to spend time with the director, Michael Mann, who was known for Heat and a bunch of things. And he was very, very large proponent for DEA and the work that they did, and really has had interest off and on, I think, in doing a DEA kind of related movie. And so part of my time up there in the building, I spent some time with the screenwriter he was talking with, and as they kind of explored this idea of maybe writing a movie about DEA or DEA stuff. And as you know, and I've learned in my time in Hollywood, these conversations generally don't go anywhere. It's the infinite development process, right? Everything is in development. Yeah, everything is in development in Hollywood. But it gave me the opportunity to sit with some folks who were writing TV shows or writing movies. And out of those conversations, it was suggested, hey, you're pretty good at telling these stories. Have you ever thought about writing stories yourself? And that kind of planted the seed. And while I was up in headquarters, that's when I kind of picked up the pen on the side. And, I was still an agent and still had, a fair amount of my career left to go. But it was there when I started writing again, seriously, as just kind of a hobby. It's just kind of something to do, something different than DEA. I was divorced at that time. I was away from my kids. We were separated by the job, which happens quite often. And so, I had this time on planes flying back and forth to see the kids at kind of time. I wasn't working cases in the middle of the night anymore. The headquarters time is somewhat 9 to 5. And so I was able to reclaim a little bit of kind of my own life and started writing again. But, I very much wanted to get back into the field. You said you can be there, 18 months to a lifetime. I was in the building for 19 months, door to door, 19 months, was my tenure in the building. A position opened up in El Paso to be the assistant special agent in charge there, which would have been the next logical step for me. And I had drawn kind of a circle around Tucson. My daughters were still in Tucson. And I said, I'll work anywhere where I can drive to Tucson. And it was 4 hours from El Paso to Tucson. And I didn't know anything about the city. All right. But I was like, I'll go be the ASAC there. And I was fortunate enough to get chosen. And after 19 months in the building, went back out to the field as the ASAC in El Paso.
Who was your SAC in El Paso?
Joe Arabit brought me out there. Right?
Yeah.
And then he was followed by Will Glaspie. So I actually had 2 SACs during my tenure there.
Yeah, I worked with Joe in Special Operations Division, and Will and I got to be friends later on down the road. I think very highly of him. So you're back on the border there. And for those that don't know, what's that city right across the border from El Paso?
A little Mexican town called Juarez, Ciudad Juarez. And, you can sit in the El Paso office and basically see Juarez from the office. And in the neighborhood that I lived in on that side of town, it was kind of up at some elevation. You were looking out over it. And, at the time that I was there, and this would have been, 2013-ish or so, you still had tremendous amount of cartel violence going on right there on the border. Juarez was the center of it, really the epicenter of a lot that was going on at that in Mexico. And, the El Paso office, which covered El Paso, and then, on the border also covered Alpine, Midland, covered Las Cruces on the Mexico side, and it had a kind of vast AOR that spanned a couple of states. I mean, we were right there, on the border dealing with it. And, I got to do great stuff as the ASAC there, great enforcement groups, and really learned a lot from Joe, who basically really stood that division up and kind of shaped what that division was doing at the time there. And learned a lot from him and the other ASACs who are already there.
It's I guess a nice way to say it would be a target-rich environment for some of the biggest cartel leaders coming across the border.
Yeah, it was a target-rich environment. We had a lot of the kind of sicarios. At that time, guys were desperate to get out of Mexico. There's a lot of intercartel killings that were going on. I mean, it was just a bloodbath down there all the way around. So we were able to cultivate sources, and we were able to work with people who very high levels because they were desperate to save themselves, really, really as well. So, I had touched on the border before in Tucson, and so I was not unfamiliar with the dynamics, but Juarez at that time was about as border as you could get, and all the big cartel players were moving through there, killing each other there, and it was a really, really steep lesson in cartels and how they functioned, really at their worst, best and worst, I guess.
Yeah, so when I was in headquarters there, after I'd been promoted up, I think I had back then, I was the director of the OSDEF Fusion Center, and we were having some meetings in El Paso, and it wasn't a deputy attorney general, but it was the next step down, who was in charge of I guess he'd be assistant deputy attorney general, in charge of the entire OSDEF program, was coming down with these meetings. And so we set up with DHS, CBP, Customs and Border Protection, a tour of the border. And so they took us up in a couple of their helicopters, and they're showing us the wall. And I'd seen the wall up close before, where I'd been to other meetings, and they take you on these little tours. And so anyway, we go way out of El Paso to the end of the wall, and there's a broken down cow fence that I could step over. And I'm looking at that. You got this big, massive wall that's, I forget how many feet high, 18, 21 feet high. And they tell me it goes so far down in the ground, 13 feet or whatever it was. And then you get to this broken down fence. And I'm thinking, how ridiculous and ironic is this to start with?
Right. Well, and Alpine was part of our AOR, and Alpine sits right on the Rio Grande. And I think I had this vision that massive river, whatnot, but really in a lot of places at Rio Grande, there's not much to it. And down there in Alpine, you still had smugglers who would come over on horseback, right? They were moving dope, really old West sort of stuff, right? Riding their horse over the Rio Grande, bringing dope over. So it was a really kind of unique confluence of kind of trafficking stuff. You had that kind of rural, almost, like I said, old West sort of on the border, guys crossing the river on horses. And then you had the massive drug tunnels, right? And everything that was going on. And you had the massive amount of killings and everything that was going on in Juarez. So, you had really 21st century cartel drug trafficking. And then you had this kind of old West stuff going on all at the same time, all in the same AOR. So
I want to see if you agree with this statement. So when I was going down there for meetings, I'd never been to El Paso until I'd been promoted up to that rank, and I'd never heard anything good about El Paso. And got down there, and I didn't think it was all that bad. The food is fantastic. The people were nice. I would imagine it gets pretty hot in the summertime, but anybody you talk to from El Paso would tell you it's the safest city in the United States. And I'm thinking, you got Juarez right there on the other side of that fence. How can this be safe? But they'd say because some of the traffickers, they want to live in a safe place. So they don't want problems in El Paso because they want to live in peace as well. Would you agree to all that?
yeah, no, I mean, I think it was a very safe zone. I mean, it was kind of a bolt hole. And, I don't want to say that it was kind of a treaty negotiated safe haven, but to some extent it kind of was. And and I felt very safe there. I mean, the cartels learned at a point during, I think, our careers where we weren't attacking agents, really after Kiki really wasn't worth it, right? Like, the risk wasn't worth the reward, right? Because the real weight of the U.S. government fell on them, right? And we were notoriously good at tracking down people who hurt or attacked agents. So the business model was like, just leave those guys alone. They're not worth it. Right.
Yeah.
And similarly, they're like, if we can go over to El Paso and we can shop and we can send our kids here and the streets aren't getting shot up, and we have enough of that. So it's kind of this unspoken halo effect, maybe chaos here and chaos there, but what El Paso, because they'd come over to the shop at the Walmart. They'd come over to the Best Buy, right? They'd come over, load up on that stuff and take it back. So I never felt in danger in El Paso. Now, you could sit in the office or sit there by that wall at night and you could hear the gunfire, right? And you could see the tracers, right? I mean, you could see that. So you knew it was there. It was inescapable. In the movie, Sicario actually did a really good job, I think, of showing some of that. But in the city itself, it was fine. And it's got a lot of unique history. It really is an old West town that's gotten big. And I didn't know anything about El Paso when I went there. I went there selfishly. I went to be as close to my daughters as I could, who were in Tucson. But I ended up really enjoying living there. My wife really enjoyed living there, and it ended up being kind of a surprisingly wonderful place. I went there for kind of strategic or mercenary reasons, and ended up loving the city and loving my time there.
Right. But you didn't stay there, did you?
No, because again, that kind of mercenary streak, it's very difficult at that level when you're an ASAC to kind of move laterally. I generally don't like that. And I understood that. But the position opened up in Phoenix to be an ASAC, which put me only about an hour and a half from my daughters, who were all still in Tucson. They were kind of being raised there. And I called in some favors, and I was fortunate that I had done good work and people knew me and respected me. So I was calling in favors, but I was asking for favors that I could pay off. And I was very lucky that some guys made some calls and did some things, and I was able to shift from being the ASAC in El Paso to the ASAC of Phoenix, where I was able to do the 3 years there working for SAC Doug Coleman at the time, and ran our strike forces there. And I'd worked in Tucson, so I wasn't unfamiliar with Arizona, but Phoenix was a whole different kind of speed, and really had a good experience working in a very, very, very good division.
Yeah, Doug Coleman was a good man. So when you said it's a different speed, is Phoenix more active than Tucson?
It's just different active. I mean, large organizations, larger stuff. And of course, I was at a different level. I was an ASAC at that point, and had a lot of groups under me, task forces and everything else. And so just everything felt bigger. The AOR was bigger in terms of the other cities that we had to deal with. So, Tucson felt like a small town, small city. Phoenix felt every bit as big a city as it really is. And not quite LA, but definitely, you knew you were working in big time drug cases with state and locals who were very good, working great deeds out there, and the other federal agencies we work with. So it was a high point in my career. After the 3 years of being an ASAC out in El Paso, I actually felt like maybe I knew what I was doing. And so every day wasn't terrifying. But no, I had a good time out there. And really, I think for many of us who do this, you get to an ASAC level, and most of us kind of think that's probably the end. I know I did, but there was the associate special agent charge, associate SAC position to open up in Houston, and bigger divisions in DEA have SAC, and then a couple of 1 or 2 associate SACs to kind of help them. The really, really big, the super SAC size divisions, and Houston was that. And I talked to some people, and I was asked if I was going to put in for it, and I had the scores and all the things you have to do to go up to be an SES, but I just wasn't sure. But my daughters had all, except my youngest, had graduated from high school and were all in college, and she was wrapping up her senior year. And so she was about to head off to college. And as much as I liked Phoenix, I didn't necessarily have it wasn't my home necessarily. And so after talking to some folks, I kind of got suckered into this. Well, throw your name in the hat and see if you want to be an SES. And being the associate SAC in Houston. So I did about 3 years in Phoenix, and then jumped ship and went up to Houston and took over as the associate. There's 2 associates who sit in Houston, and I was one of them. Got Will Glaspie was the SAC there as well, and got to work again for him. And honestly, I thought Phoenix was the end of my career, right? And then thought that Houston was going to be the end. And we liked Houston, and I had been there about a year and was still away from retirement. And they made Louisville into a field division, and DEA doesn't have a lot of field divisions, and they don't make new ones very often at all. but there was kind of a flurry of activity. They made Omaha a field division, and they made Louisville a field division, which was actually 3 states. They called it the Louisville Field Division, but it was Kentucky, Tennessee, and West Virginia. And they had picked that, and Chris Evans was the SAC here for a while. And I knew Chris, and then, he was kind of being moved up. So the dominoes kind of all fell in a way that it looked like the Louisville division was going to be open. Never thought I would come home. For me, it would be the second time. Never really thought I'd be the SAC of my own division. But I'd been out here. I'd grown up out here. I knew this area, had done this sort of work. And so, again, threw my name in the hat and had some advocates for me. And after a year in Houston, found myself the SAC of my own division out here in Louisville and came out here.
Excellent. And I just want to clarify for our audience that an SES is a senior executive service, and that position is as high as you can go in DEA and the other federal law enforcement agencies without presidential appointment. So the Attorney General has to sign off on your appointment as part of the senior executive service. It's a big deal. Honestly, the money's not all that much better. There are a couple little perks that go with it, but you're the king in your own little kingdom there, but you're also responsible for everything that goes on in that kingdom. So there's a lot of responsibility that goes with that.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of be careful what you wish for sort of thing. And I think that when, you and I came up kind of in the same era, I mean, the SACs were kind of the preeminent position. I mean, that's what that's what you always hope to do, right? You hope to make an SES and hope to be the SAC of a domestic field division, right? Like that was, and so to have that opportunity was great. And it's a far cry when it's all on your. I've been an ASAC and I've been in management really at that point for a decade and a half, but it's a whole different situation when the buck stops with you, right?
Oh yeah.
And it does. You really only answer to that point to the chief of operations and the administrator. And I had 3 states, had 15 offices across the 3 states in a very difficult rural area. A lot of task force guys. So they were DEA guys, but they didn't necessarily have the same training or stuff as we did. And, dealing really with the opioid crisis at that time, fentanyl and oxy and all that was really coming to the forefront. The week that I showed up in the office to be the SAC, that was the week of COVID, when basically the government shut down for COVID. And so I showed up in an office that was shut down, right? It was me and a couple of ASACs, a couple other people, and everyone else was home. So the first few months of my job, I couldn't meet with people in person. I'd go into the office every day. I'd drive on empty highways, right? I'd go into this empty federal building and I would sit in this empty office space with just a couple of us, right? Trying to put a division together, because still the Louisville division was kind of being built, an airplane in mid-flight at that time. All their offices had all been kind of jammed together. So I would love to say that I brought this great kind of enforcement vision or whatever, but really I was trying to hold the place together with tape and baling wire and just trying to put processes in place, keep people safe because of COVID. So I had a really, really difficult first year, and not indicative of, I think, of anyone else who'd kind of taken over as a SAC, right? Trying to build the division while keeping the division safe, while not even getting to see all of the division, because I drove to all these offices. Yeah, because you couldn't go anywhere. But we got through that, and I was able to, we got brand new office space. We got to, during my tenure as SAC, got to move us into a beautiful new a building outside of downtown Louisville, kind of a crown jewel for the division. Got to stand up some other offices, got to get some positions, really did a lot of things, I think, that set the division up for ongoing success long after I'm gone. And that's what you hope to do. And that at the position as a SAC is to, continue to lay stones that are a foundation for all those who come after you and make their work easier so they can focus on the enforcement stuff. So I was still scrounging for cars and everything else when I first got to the Louisville Field Division. And by the time I left, all that stuff had been taken care of. And I think my biggest success during my tenure there was to move us from this loose collection of offices and whatnot to an actual full-fledged field division in a beautiful office that, has now been kind of the centerpiece for what we do out here in Appalachia.
Outstanding. What year did you report there? Was that 20 or 21?
That would have been, about 2020-ish. And I was there until 2024.
When you retired.
Yeah.
I know that, I went to high school and college in West Virginia and very familiar with the oxy issues and the painkillers and the pain clinics and all that stuff there. And the reputation that West Virginia had as per capita was the worst place in the United States for painkillers. Did you see that in Tennessee and Kentucky as well? Or
yeah, we did. I mean, really, when I got there, that was kind of the real breakout of fentanyl. So, and the division was kind of the epicenter for that across all three states. We also saw kind of a surprising resurgence of cocaine near the kind of the end of my career there. Of course, meth never went away across my three states, but really the pills were everywhere during my time there. As bad as it was in West Virginia, it was nearly as bad in Kentucky and in Tennessee.
When your first book, you published it, I think, in 2016. Does that sound right?
Right.
So in the government, you're not allowed to have a second job, like a side job. But I'm going to guess that they consider publishing a different animal. Does that sound right?
It was like I wrote that book. So it came out 2016 when I was just basically made the move from El Paso. The book got on in El Paso, and it was edited during the time I was in El Paso. And actually, that book, The Far Empty, was written predominantly during my time there while I was in ASAC, and it's written a good part of it placed in that kind of alpine area, but I was seeing firsthand and kind of drove my decision to write that book. But I had been writing on the side for a couple of years up to that point and had gotten an agent. And we took a book out on submission, which means we took a book out to publishers that didn't sell. So I was kind of writing other stuff, and The Far Empty is what came out of that. But I didn't know what I didn't know, and I didn't know anything. And so I kind of got into this publishing thing, not really realizing what I was doing. Started writing and then got an agent, and then we're going to publish. And I kind of told myself, well, I'll deal with DEA on the side of it when I actually sell a book, if I ever sell a book, right? And so I got the call from my agent when I was sitting in El Paso. I was at my desk, and she called and she said, hey, talking to some folks out in New York. It was Putnam and Sons, part of Penguin Random House. She goes, I think they really like this book you wrote, this The Far Empty. And I'm like, oh, that's great. And she said, they want to talk to you about it and make sure you're not crazy. I said, well, then I probably shouldn't talk to them. And she said, nope. So can you do a call with this New York publisher today? And so I said, yeah. So I looked out my office. Nobody was needing me for anything. So I shut the door and talked to my editor at what became my editor there at Putnam. And she had wonderful things to say about the book. And again, I didn't really know what I was doing. And she said, I really like the book. Can you write another one? And I said, I don't know, honestly. I said, I think I can. She goes, do you think you could write a sequel to this book? And I said, well, that's really hard because I kill most everyone in this book. And she goes, yes, that's a problem. Probably going to tweak the ending a little bit. She goes, but we just want to know if you'd be, willing to write some more, if you could, or wanted to write more books for us. And I said, sure, I'll try. But she didn't say, oh, congratulations. She didn't say anything. So hung up. And then the rest of the day, I'm trying to, sign off on ops plans, meet with GSs. And I'm thinking ahead of, have I sold a book or not? I don't know. And I'm driving home, and my agent calls, and she says, they love you, they love the book, they want you, and this is their offer. And and I nearly hit a tree because I couldn't believe somebody was going to actually pay me for my book, and the amount that they wanted to pay me was pretty good. And I said, I'll sign it now. And went home and had to wait for my wife to come home to tell her I'd sold the book. But after I sold it was then when I went to my SAC and said, I need to talk to you. I think I just sold the book and they're going to publish it. And I don't know what to do. But I have to say that the DA was great about this, because it really wasn't a second job. It was something I did on my own time. And it wasn't like I was going to work at a Best Buy or something. And so I went through the kind of publishing review board, but really what they did is they hooked me up with somebody in chief counsel's office whose job was to vet just my books. So and not all of my books have dealt with cops and crime and DEA, but those that did, while I was still on a job, I sent them through them. They read them, make sure that it wasn't getting in the way trade secrets or anything like that. Everything was open source and whatnot. So DA really kind of streamlined it, made it easy, because I was doing something unique that not a lot of us were doing at the time. And the only thing that had two kind of requirements that they really wanted me to hold to, which was I did book tours and book events. I couldn't speak for DEA. I had to be very clear that when I was there, I was talking about books and not about DEA policy. And if I got thrown questions on radio programs and TV shows, which occasionally happened, where I was kind of supposed to speak about, or they were being asked to talk about DEA as an agent, I had to be very firm. My agents, my representatives will always say, hey, he can't go into these territories. He's not going to talk about drug legalization. He's not going to talk about, any of these sorts of things that people kind of want to back into. And so 99% of my interviews didn't have any problems with that. And the few that did, I just said, hey, I'm here to talk about the book, right? If you want to talk specifically about DEA, I'll get you a DEA spokesman who can talk about that. And so that was one thing that I had to hold to. And then my bio, kind of what was put on books and what kind of my background, that had to be cleared, because you could only say certain things about yourself. And we probably went through 20 iterations of my bio that ended up on my first book, to get something that everybody was happy with. That, because the publisher wants to say, hey, he's a federal agent. DEA wants to make sure that it's not that doesn't look like DEA's pushing me. So I was kind of a unique case, but because I'd been around a while at that point in my career, I knew a lot of people. I'd been up in congressional and public affairs. I was fortunate that I had people who say, hey, it's kind of an interesting thing he's doing. And so let's let him do it until it's a problem. As long as it's not a problem, then we'll keep letting him do it. And so that's kind of what happened. And to go on book tours, I'd take leave, tell the guys, hey, I'm going to be off for a couple of days. I'm on a book tour. Book come out, I go do book signings and stuff like that. And I was able, from 2016 up until I retired in 2024, I was able to kind of write these books on the side and do book events and do things with kind of minimal concern as far as DEA was concerned. But DEA made it easy for me.
Yeah. And ladies and gentlemen, he's talking about publishing 6 books. It's amazing how many guys call Javier and I now, and cops, whether it's federal agents or state and locals, and they want to write a book and they're asking for advice. Well, we had a ghostwriter. I mean, I can't tell you. We had a literary agent. We had St. Martin's Press was our publisher. I don't know about that process. I don't know about editing. We gave her the information. She wrote a book. But I'm not kidding. It's amazing. And then there's another retired agent, Jeff Higgins. Do you know Jeff?
I know Jeff, actually. He and I do a book Zoom happy hour sort of thing every couple of months. There's a group of writers, and he's one of them, and we get on a Zoom happy hour and talk about writing. So, but yeah, I know Jeff. Yeah,
good guy. He was a former guest here on the show too, and it's just it's heartening, I guess would be the right word, to see our people. A lot of people think we're just knuckle draggers, that give us a gun, we go out and kick doors and take names. And that's not at all what it's about. But that's one thing I like about the show here, is I can bring people on that have already done the job and show what this has led to in retirement from the federal service. And so that's where we are with you. I want to ask you, why did you decide to retire when you did?
Because I was coming up against my mandatory retirement. I retired just before I turned 57. And, I was looking at, or just before I turned 56, and then 57 was our mandatory. So, I was just about a year out from mandatory. And, so I had to start looking at something else to do, quite honestly. And I think there's a lot of guys in our job, they kind of leave 50, 51, they kind of leave on the side, or they go right to the end. And I thought that I would go right to the end, because when I left, I still loved the job, but the writing stuff was doing well. I had opportunities coming up. I felt I had gotten the division to where it needed to be, and I wasn't sure me sitting around for another year was going to be useful. Let's let some other people kind of take over. And I had turned down some writing opportunities because I was still the SAC of a division. And, I was telling myself, what's the real difference if I leave now or 12 months from now? And so I kind of talked myself into it. And actually, to be honest, my wife talked me into it, because she was kind of ready for me to go and kind of reclaim some of my life. As a SAC, you're on 24/7 in a way, even that you're not street, right? Because you're responsible for all these cases, all these operations going on all over your AOR. And I'd been hemming and hawing about going. I was like, well, I can just stay a few more months. And she walked in one day and said, "You're going to retire in February." And I'm like, "Well, why is that?" She goes, "Because I already planned the party and I already bought the tickets for the kids, and they're not refundable. So everybody's coming to your retirement. So you're doing it." And so she just said it was time.
And you stood up to her and said, "Yes, dear."
Right. I said, "Well, I hope it's a good party." So, I left because it was time. I'm not sure I left because I was ready, but I understood that it was time. And again, I had opportunity that I had kind of been putting on the back burner. And I was afraid if I didn't jump on those, I turned enough down that if I didn't jump on them, that door would close. And so it was kind of like, I need to accept the fact that my DA career is over. Let's go do this other thing that I've been kind of doing on the side and see if I can, do it full time.
So what was next up? Now we're into life after DEA.
Now we're into life after DEA. And so I've been offered the opportunities to come work on some TV shows. As I was writing these novels, I had several of my novels optioned to be films or TV shows, both. And, that never happens, or generally doesn't happen. But what that basically is an option is somebody comes and kind of buys the rights to your book. And usually it's a producer or director or somebody, and they want to develop it, find some talent attachment. You learn pretty quickly in Hollywood that writers aren't talent. Actors and directors are talent. We aren't. But they want to take your book and they want to get some folks attached to it. And then maybe it gets off the ground and gets made. And I've been very successful having people option my books, not quite as successful as actually have them turned into anything, but that's all part of the process. And through it, I was able to kind of meet a lot of folks in the industry, and got some opportunities to write a feature film. I wrote a pilot, earned my WGA credit. And this was, again, kind of all on the side, stuff I was doing at nights and weekends. But as I was kind of eyeing retirement, getting closer to retirement, I've been asked, will you come work on a TV show? Which means I'd have to do it full time. And I kept saying, no, I don't want to retire yet. I still love my job. And I got a call about working on the Paramount show Bass Reeves, Lawman Bass Reeves, which was kind of a Yellowstone adjacent production. Actually, Taylor Sheridan was executive producer of it. And the showrunner for that, and the showrunner's guy who kind of heads the whole show, said, "Hey, you want to come out here and work on the show?" I said, "Well, still not ready to retire." And he goes, "Well, how about this? Take a couple of weeks off, come out here, sit in the writer's room, see what you think about it. Like, just kind of try it out." And so
that's a nice offer.
I know. I said, so I took some annual leave, called the chief of ops. I was SAC of the division, and said, "Hey, I'm going to be off for a couple of weeks. I'm going to LA. I'm going to go sit in this writer's room and see if I like being a Hollywood writer." And he's like, "Are you shitting me?" I'm like, "Nope, that's what I'm going to go do."
Who was ops then? Chief of ops?
He was the SAC of New York before that. It'll come to me. Circle.
I know who you're talking about. He's got his own company now, Ray Donovan.
Yep. Yeah, Ray. Exactly. Thank you. And Ray was a very decent guy. I loved as chief of ops, very supportive of the division, supported me. And so, and Ray had been in New York. I mean, he dealt with a lot of Hollywood types and stuff from in New York. So he was like, hey, that's a hell of an opportunity. Take the time off, go out there and tell me what you think. And so I did. And I went out, sat in LA for a couple of weeks, sat in a room with a bunch of writers, and saw what it was like to put a TV show together. And coming out of that, I was offered to write an episode. I kind of thought I would just go out there and hang out and offer some advice, but they gave me the chance to write an episode, which I did. And I was like, I think I could actually do this, you know? So I told showrunner, I said, next show you're on, that'll probably dovetail with the time that I'm ready to retire, and I'll come and work for you. And sure enough, that's kind of how the stars aligned. I retired in February of 2024, spent the rest of 2024 working on a book of my own, which I sold, a script of my own, co-wrote a feature film, which we sold. And then the very start of last year, he came to me and said, hey, I'm going to take over this Yellowstone spinoff. Will you come work with me? And that's what I did. So I was fully retired, full-fledged writer. And last year went out and lived in LA for several months and worked on the Yellowstone spinoff that's titled Dutton Ranch.
I tell you what, man, it's I don't know how many of you folks out there have seen the Yellowstone series with Taylor Sheridan, I guess is the executive producer.
Mm-hmm. One of them. There's several, but he's on our show, but he's one of them. Yes.
Yeah. Just fantastic. I love that show. Watch the prequels, the two prequels that are out there. Was it 1883 and 1923? I think are the names of those. And now they're doing one called 1944, which is another prequel. That means it all happens before you get to the Yellowstone series, but seems kind of out of order there, but just unbelievable, man. It's exciting. And I mean, I know you love writing, but did you ever foresee that anything like this? I mean, successful writing career, you got 7 books out there now. Your latest is, I have to look here, The Scar of the Sky.
Scar of the Sky, yeah. It's a thriller. It came out in September, I think. Yeah, last September.
And not to mention, or not to forget, that in 2024, you were a finalist for the International Thriller Writers Award for Best Paperback Original.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was for a book. Yeah, Call the Dark. I got to go to New York and go to a very, very fancy dinner, and with a lot of great writers, and so.
And so, does that sound like a knuckle dragger to you? First of all, you don't get into William and Mary if you're not smart. You don't get into George Mason Law School. Your sister doesn't go to UVA. I mean, you've got some parents that sounds like they did a fantastic job raising you two.
Yeah, my parents were always readers. Books were always around our house. So it was something I always did. It was something I always loved. When I was a baby agent out in LA on surveillance, you didn't have cell phones, you didn't have iPads. So what did I do when I was on surveillance? If I didn't have the eye, I was kind of sitting on one of those side streets. I read paperback books or library books or whatever. So, and I think that what's interesting about people who do the job that we do, law enforcement and military too, is first of all, you have to be smart, right? I mean, most of our job, we talk about the exciting stuff, but a lot of our job is writing a ton of reports. It's getting up on the stand, testifying, right? Like none of the exciting stuff matters if you can't narrate and document and prove what you've done, right? And so all that is telling a story. And so the best storytellers I've ever met really are not in Hollywood, right? They're good craftsmen. But if you're just talking about telling stories, it's the cops and the military guys that I've spent time with when you're sitting in a helicopter, you're sitting in the back of a car for 9 hours of surveillance, you're sitting around the bay. I mean, no one tells better stories than cops, and they get better with every retelling, right? I mean, so
Yep.
cops are great storytellers, and that's all that this is. I sat down and actually wrote these stories down, but it's just telling stories about people, what we did. Being an undercover, it's not about being necessarily the toughest or biggest guy. It's the ability to talk, right? It's the ability to talk people into anything and make them believe almost everything. And so, I don't find it such a transition or kind of a leap, because the people that we worked with and the people I heard tell stories, right? Most of those guys could tell these sorts of stories if they just want to sit down and write a book. That's the part that's they got to get over. But it is not a big a jump from doing what we do into telling stories for Hollywood as you would think. And one other thing that Hollywood and DEA share is every dope deal we ever did, right? Nobody's telling the truth. Yeah. Every drug trafficker is like, yeah, the dope is here, it's on its way. If we had a nickel for every deal, right, that we got lied to, no one's telling you the truth, right? It's better not to tell the truth. And I feel like Hollywood is like that too, right? Everybody loves something until they don't. Every deal is done until it isn't, right? I've told many producers I've met with, I said, you sound just like every drug trafficker I've ever dealt with, right? Right? The check is in the mail, right? Just like the dope is here, right? Everyone's kind of bullshitting, right? And so the two things are not as different as you would think.
Right. You're exactly right. Because I can't count the number of times that Javi and I have met with different people, either in person or on Zoom calls or just talking on the phone, and you get promised the world. And it takes you a while to get to the point where, okay, if they call, they call. And it's to the point now that when one does call back, you're like, okay, let's go over this again. Because, what you told me before, I get promised the world, nothing ever happens. I forgot what you told me. So tell me what it is we're going to do here.
Yeah. And it's not malicious. It's just how the business works, right?
Right.
And no one wants to say no, but very few people can say yes. And so that's kind of where you spend a lot of time talking and setting up meetings, right? Just like setting up a dope deal. And maybe everyone shows up with dope and money, or maybe no one does, but that's kind of the business. And
we've got one that we flew up to, and this is not related to DEA. It's another project we're working on called The Lost Clipper, but we'd flown up to Minneapolis, gosh, I don't even remember, several years ago, and spent a whole day in an old warehouse filming a sizzle reel for the project. And it just never went anywhere until about 2 weeks ago. And now there's a network that's interested, and but you got to go back and say, okay, what was this all about? And that one I'm kind of intimately involved with. Javier is as well. But can you say, well, I know you can say, which of the spinoffs from Yellowstone are you currently working on?
Yeah, I mean, there's two that have been announced, and one is Marshals, which follows the character of Casey. Grimes is the actor, but these are two of the kind of spinoffs directly from the last season 5 of Yellowstone. So there's the Marshall show with Casey, and then there's Dutton Ranch, which will follow Beth and Rip, for those of you who know those characters. And so that's the show that I have been involved in. And obviously I can't talk much about the show itself, but it was been an amazing experience, kind of be involved right from the beginning, to work with the actors and everyone involved in the show, particularly for someone who didn't have a huge background in TV, who was learning kind of, on the job myself, not the writing part of it, because, I'd written, a bunch of novels and had written scripts and stuff, but just to really see the development cycle of a TV show, particularly a show of that size and that scope. And announced actors are Ed Harris, who I've been a fan of, and Ed Benning. These are been out there in the press that have been attached, and to know that the words that you're writing are to be spoken by these actors is great. And then because it's in its own universe and shares DNA with a lot of the other shows in that world, then you're working with department heads, props and production design and directors, all who have worked on Yellowstone or worked on 1983 or even the other shows, Landman and the others that are out there. So really was a crash course this last year in just the cradle to grave making of a TV show. And I was a small part of it, but I got a front row seat to it. And it's really impressive to see, movie making, because that's really what it's 10-hour movie is really what it is, to see movie making at that scale. I mean, what Hollywood does better than anything else in the world.
Absolutely. The one Marshals, I mean, everybody everybody liked Casey Dutton in the Yellowstone series. You know, he was like the little hero that would come in and save the day. And then everybody's waiting for Beth and Rip to come out with their own. That's been talked about for a long time. And so now you guys are writing that. And I did a little research before we talked, and it looked like there's a couple more projects that Taylor Sheridan is considering off that, one being called The Madison, which looks like he's got Michelle Pfeiffer and Kurt Russell as potential actor and actresses in that, focusing on new characters. And then he's the owner of the 4 Sixes Ranch, right? So that was one I saw. He's actually going to do a series on the 4 Sixes, and it's going to feature the kid that was referred to as Jimmy, was his stage name in Yellowstone. And that's a kid that came in just like a lost puppy.
Mm-hmm. and yeah, he had the drug problems. He had been involved with some drug dealers. And
then you felt sorry for him, and then you end up liking him, and he just can't seem to do anything right.
Yeah. Well, it's an amazing universe that's been built out there. These shows, Taylor does incredible work with kind of in this genre, in this world that he's built. Great craftsmen involved in it. You know, I didn't know much about ranching specifically or horses. I know a lot more now after having spent some time out there, and I got to meet a lot of the wranglers, you know, the real guys who work on these ranches and deal with these horses, and they're all incredible at what they can do. You know, I'm biased. You know, I think it'll be great. You know, when it comes out, I know how much work a lot of people have put into it, but I'll be eager to see it when everyone else does when it comes out sometime this year.
Oh yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I think Marshall's comes out in March. I think I just saw on TV last night, so we're looking forward to that. Just quickly, so you're a writer on the show. What does that entail? When you go to work in the morning, what do you do? I mean, do you just sit there all day going, okay, what would happen next? Or is there research involved? Are you reading, or what do you do?
We're crafting the show. So the showrunner is kind of the creative head, and usually comes with an idea of kind of generally what they want to see during a season of a multi-episode series, which is what we had. But then you go every day into a writer's room. We had a bungalow on the Radford lot. Other shows are being filmed, and movies as well. I mean, there's massive sound stages. So you go to work every day and you're walking past actors and stunt things and all sorts of stuff going on, because it's an active filming lot. Actually, that Radford lot's where Gunsmoke was filmed. It's a historical lot. Gunsmoke, Gilligan's Island, and, you know, 30 Rock, and tons of shows and films have been made there.
Wow.
But we had a bungalow on that lot, and so we'd show up every day and sit in this room and basically craft what the season would look like. And you got a lot of smart people in there debating and arguing the best way to tell a story. And then, you know, you kind of hammer out what the season will look like. And so again, it's a lot of sitting in a room and putting up note cards on boards and really kind of building the plane in mid-flight a little bit. And then usually in these situations, as it was in ours, then the episodes are kind of divvied up amongst the writers. And so we're all responsible for kind of writing our own episodes, but it's a collective effort to get us there. When the show comes out, my name will be on some episodes, but, you know, at the end of the day, we all really contributed and made sure that the story as a whole made sense. And it's a collective group for these individual episodes.
So it's another team effort, just like being a federal drug agent.
Yeah, and to some extent, it's sitting in those writers' rooms is no different than sitting in a bay, right? You got diverse personalities, you got the quiet folks, you got the loudmouth folks, right? You've got to kind of finesse personalities. Everybody's got stories to tell. Everybody wants their stories to be the ones that make the board and get up on there. And so it very similar. Like that part felt very at home to me, right? Sitting around a table. Felt very, very comfortable to me as we tried to put a story together.
So, I mean, I think this is exciting. You know, it's very different than being an agent. I mean, as far as the danger levels involved, whether there's a life at risk or not, probably not so much, but I still think it's exciting. You know, and you're getting in something new, something you love. The writing continues. You've got 7 books out there. you're working on this current show. What do you see as the next step for J. Todd Scott?
Well, I want to continue to work on further TV shows. We'll see kind of how that pans out over the next few months. I did sell a feature film that I co-wrote, so that's again in development, but at least we sold it. And so we're in the process, me and my co-writer, in the process of taking some notes and polishing that screenplay up, and hopefully that'll get made. That's kind of on the fast track right now. I've got another feature film that I wrote myself that we're looking to take out and find a home for, and then the next book. I'm already starting that. So, in this business, it's kind of, you just move from project to project and kind of keep multiple projects going at the same time, knowing that they don't all have to hit. You just hope one of them hits.
Yeah. Man, that's fantastic. So we're getting close to the end here. I just want to ask you a question I ask every guest on here. And that is, do you have any words of wisdom or advice that you would like to share with maybe somebody's thinking about a career in law enforcement or the military or a high risk occupation, or just anything in general that you'd like to leave the listeners with?
Yeah. I mean, for me, DEA ended up being a calling, right? It was never just a job for me. I mean, it became my identity. It became my personality. It became my lifestyle. I don't know if that's healthy, but that's the only way I knew how to do it. And I think in these sorts of careers, for most people, they become not just a job, but a lifestyle. And I think you need to be prepared to embrace it. I think you need to understand that going into it. And when I mean a lifestyle, it affects not just you, but your family and your kids. Like everyone, when my kids came to my retirement party, they knew my job, right? I mean, they lived it. But when they sat there and they saw those people and they saw what it meant to me, and they knew the risks I had taken and the hours I'd been away and all of that, it really hit them as well, what this meant to me. So I loved my career. Wouldn't change a minute of it. I was blessed and fortunate the whole way, but it takes as much as it gives, it takes a lot. And if you want to do this sort of career, understand it's going to take a lot from you. It's going to take a lot from your family. I think it's all worth it, but it's something you need to know going into it.
Very well said. That's the regular listeners have heard me talk for years, probably since I retired, is if you think DEA is a 9-to-5 job, Monday through Friday, don't apply. Because, and you said the exact thing I say, it's not a job, it's a lifestyle. And that means it's going to impact your entire family. It was funny because my kids knew some. My daughters probably knew more about what I did than my son because he's older. But when the Narco series came out, he came up to, he's an orthopedic surgeon up in Atlanta at Children's Hospital. He came to me and he said, "Dad, you never told me about all that stuff." So, and if you want somebody to be proud of you, that's your family. If my family's proud of me and my colleagues from the job, if they're proud of me, I couldn't ask for anything better in life. It's that's good. I'm happy with what I've done. And I think you feel the same way.
No, absolutely. And I know, and I know you share this sentiment. I've had a lot of success on this job, but I only had it because I worked with great people. I never went through a single door alone. I never did a single UC without someone keeping an eye on me. There's not a single thing on this job that I could have done by myself, nor did I want to do it. And that's really the gift of the job. The people that I met, the people who took care of me, and the people I got to when I was a boss during my time.
Yep. That's the blue brotherhood and sisterhood. And listen, a shout out to our families. I refer to them as our unsung heroes because they allow us to go out and do the things that we think are important. And we expect them to stay back and raise the kids and take care of the household and deal with all the problems of life while we're running around and having a good time and thinking we're Supermen. So, and I feel sure you feel the same way with your family. So thank you guys.
Absolutely.
Just before you go here, if you want to find out more about Mr. Scott here, you can find him on Instagram and Facebook at J. Todd Scott. You can find him on Substack, which he educated me on what that is. J. Todd Scott Writes, WRITES. On X, J. Todd Scott, and his website is jtoddscott.com. His books, he's got 7 books out there: The Far Empty, White Hot Sun, This Side of Night, Lost River, The Flock, a thriller, Call the Dark, a thriller, and the most recent is Scar the Sky. I found all of them on Amazon, and I'm sure you can find them at Barnes & Noble and probably your favorite bookstore as well. Man, thank you so much, Todd. I appreciate your time. I'm still having a little issue with my computer here. I'm not sure what's going on with the Wi-Fi today, but it's working. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for your service to the country. What you did is nothing short of being an American hero and an American patriot. You chose to serve your fellow man as a public servant. And in my book, that's a badge of honor. There is no higher calling than serving your fellow man. So, brother, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very, very, very much. I enjoyed all of it.
Well, and when you see these new Yellowstone series comes out, and you see his name up there, now you can say, I know that guy. I saw him on Murph's show. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you again so much for continuing to come back every week. We're in our fifth season here of Game of Crimes, and I certainly hope that we make it to the 10th season if we can go that far. So if I'm around, I'm going to try and keep this thing going. Couldn't do any of it without your support. And I tell you, I truly appreciate you guys coming to join me every week to play the biggest, the baddest, the most dangerous game of all, and that's our Game of Crimes. God bless everyone. See you next week.